I want to start with a confession. For most of my life, I believed happiness was something that arrived. Like weather. Like a package on a doorstep. I thought if I waited long enough, worked hard enough, achieved enough, it would simply show up, and I would finally feel like myself. It never came the way I expected, and it took me years to understand why. Happiness is not a delivery, it is not a destination stamped on some far horizon. It is not even really a feeling. It is a pattern, a groove worn into the mind, the way water carves a canyon, not in a single flood, but in 1,000 quiet repetitions. And here is the strange, beautiful truth hiding underneath all of it. The brain does not care what is true. It cares what is practiced. Whatever you rehearse, it reinforces. Whatever you repeat, it remembers. Neuroscientists have a phrase for this. Neurons that fire together, wire together, but you don't need a laboratory to know it. You've felt it. The worry that becomes a well-worn rut you fall into without even trying. The self-doubt that shows up uninvited because you've invited it, quietly, 10,000 times before. So tonight I don't want to talk to you about chasing happiness. I want to talk about building it, brick by brick, habit by habit, because the architecture of a joyful mind is not mysterious, it is learnable. And what is learnable can be taught, and what can be taught can be lived. Let me take you somewhere. Picture an old man sitting by a window every morning, drinking his tea slowly, watching the light change on the wall. Nothing dramatic happens in that room, and yet he radiates a kind of peace that money cannot buy and struggle cannot easily destroy. What does he know that we don't? He knows the first habit, asterisk, he pays attention on purpose. Most of us live our lives half present. One eye on the moment, one eye on the notification, the next worry, the next unfinished task. But attention is not a passive faculty, it is a muscle, and it is also a vote. Every time you choose what to attend to, you are voting for the kind of mind you will have tomorrow. The old man isn't happy because his life is simple. He is happy because he has trained himself to actually be in the simple life he has. This is the beginning of everything. Presence is not a luxury. It is the soil in which every other habit grows. From presence, something else becomes possible, not as decoration, not as a hashtag, but as a discipline of the eyes. Here is what almost no one tells you about gratitude. It is not about having more. It is about noticing more. The brain has what scientists call a negativity bias, an ancient survival mechanism that scans constantly for threat, for lack, for what's wrong. It kept our ancestors alive on the savannah, but in a modern life with no lions, that same scanning becomes a slow, quiet erosion of joy. Gratitude interrupts the scan. It says, yes, and also, look at this, look at the warmth of this room. Look at the fact that you woke up breathing. This is not naive positivity. This is a redirection of a very old, very powerful spotlight, pointed now toward what sustains you instead of what threatens you. But happiness is not only inward. It reaches outward too, into the third habit, the one our culture most quietly starves, asterisk connection. We were never meant to carry our minds alone. For most of human history, survival itself depended on the tribe, and the nervous system still knows this, even when the modern world tells us otherwise, tells us to optimize, to hustle, to go it alone, to prove ourselves in solitude. But loneliness is not just an ache. It is measurable, physiological weight, a chronic stress the body was never built to sustain. To rewire the brain for happiness is to rewire it for relationship, a handheld, a story shared, a friend who simply says, I see you and you are not too much, and this brings us, gently, to something harder to talk about. Asterisk, the habit of moving through fear instead of around it. Every person in this room has a story they haven't told, because telling it feels like standing at the edge of something. Fear whispers a very convincing lie, that safety means staying small, staying still, staying silent. But the brain that avoids discomfort in the short term pays for it, in the long term, in a kind of quiet shrinking and narrowing of the self. Courage does not mean fear disappears. It means you build a new relationship with it. You start to recognize the trembling not as a stop sign but as a threshold. Every single time you walk through discomfort instead of around it, you are teaching your own mind a radical new lesson. I can survive this. I am not as fragile as fear insists. That lesson repeated becomes identity, which leads us to the fifth habit, and maybe the most misunderstood one. Self-compassion. We have confused self-criticism with self-improvement for so long that kindness toward ourselves can feel at first like weakness. But think about how you'd speak to a child who was struggling. Would you list their failures? Or would you kneel down and say, "This is hard, and you are still worthy, and we will figure it out together"? Now ask yourself, why does that child not deserve to be you? The inner voice you use most often becomes the architecture of your self-worth. Self-compassion is not indulgence. It is maintenance. It is the difference between a mind that collapses under pressure and one that bends, absorbs, and keeps walking. There is a sixth habit, quieter than the others, almost invisible. The practice of letting go of what was never yours to control. So much suffering is not caused by circumstance, but by our grip on circumstance. The desperate need for the past to have gone differently, for people to be other than who they are, for the future to guarantee itself before we're willing to walk into it. There is a certain peace available only on the other side of acceptance. Not resignation, acceptance. The difference is enormous. Resignation says, nothing matters. Acceptance says, this is what is true right now and I will meet it honestly. Rather than fight a war I cannot win against reality itself. From acceptance grows the seventh habit, movement, not as punishment for the body, but as a conversation with it. We so often treat the body as a machine to be optimized or a mistake to be corrected. But the body is not separate from the mind. It is where the mind lives. Every walk taken, every breath drawn deep into the belly, every night of real rest. These are not side notes to a happy life. They are the very ground it stands on. You cannot think your way into well-being while ignoring the vessel doing the thinking. The eighth habit is one you already know, though you may have forgotten it. Purpose. The decision to attach your days to something larger than your own comfort. I have met people with very little who radiated meaning, and people with everything who felt hollow. The difference was never the size of their life. It was whether they had asked themselves the question that matters. What am I for? Purpose does not require greatness. It requires direction, a reason to rise that isn't only about you. When the mind has a why, it can tolerate almost any how. The ninth habit is subtle, and it is this. The practice of celebrating small wins before waiting for the big ones. We have been taught to withhold joy until the achievement is large enough to deserve it. But the brain that only celebrates milestones spends most of its life in a kind of quiet, joyless waiting room. Teach your mind instead to notice the small proof of progress. The hard conversation you finally had, the boundary you finally set, the morning you chose to begin again. Joy is not a reward for arrival. It is fuel for the journey. And the 10th habit, the one that gathers all the others into a single thread. The willingness to begin again. Not perfection. Not a single dramatic transformation, arriving like lightning. Just the quiet, unglamorous decision, made again and again. To return to presence when you drift. To return to gratitude when you forget. To return to courage when fear convinces you to shrink. This is the secret no one puts on a poster. Happiness is not a permanent state you achieve and then keep forever, like a trophy on a shelf. It is a practice you return to, the way a musician returns to their instrument. Not because they've mastered it, but because the returning is the mastery. So here is where I want to leave you. Somewhere inside you, right now, is a version of your mind that has been shaped by 1,000 small repetitions you never chose consciously. Inherited fears, absorbed doubts, patterns worn into you before you even knew you had a choice. But here is the revelation. The one thing I hope you carry out of this room tonight. You are not the mind you were given. You are the mind you keep choosing, one repetition at a time. The canyon is not carved in a single flood. It is carved in the quiet return of water, day after day, to the same gentle path. So return. Return to presence, return to gratitude, return to courage, to kindness, to purpose, to the small joys you almost walked past, because the brain is not fixed like stone, it is more like a river. And you are the one who decides, drop by drop, choice by choice, morning by morning, which direction it will finally, faithfully flow. Here it is, expanded, no headings, no closing wrap-up, just the reflection itself. There is an old assumption most of us carry without ever examining it. That the mind is fixed, that somewhere early in life, a version of you got set, like concrete pouring into a mold, and everything after that has simply been the shape you're stuck living inside. We say things like, "That's just how I am," or "I've always been an anxious person," or "I'm not the type who feels joy easily," and we say them with the certainty of someone reciting a fact of nature, not realizing we are actually reciting a habit. But the mind is not concrete, it never was. It is closer to a river, and rivers do not carve their paths in a single dramatic flood. They carve them slowly, through repetition, through the same water, choosing the same route again and again until the ground itself remembers the shape of the choosing. That is what a habit of mind actually is. Not a fixed trait, but a groove worn smooth by 10,000 small repetitions, most of which you never consciously agreed to. Think about the last time you caught yourself spiraling into worry before anything had even gone wrong. That spiral didn't appear from nowhere. It was built, quietly, invisibly, one rehearsed thought at a time long before tonight. And this is either the most discouraging fact you'll hear all week, or the most liberating one, depending entirely on what you do with it. Because if the mind can be worn into a shape through repetition, it can also be reshaped through repetition. The same law that built the rut can build a new path beside it. This is not about positive thinking. It's not about pretending that difficult things aren't difficult. It's about understanding that every time you practice presence instead of distraction, every time you choose a thought and stay with it, instead of letting the old groove pull you back in, you are not performing a nice mental exercise. You are laying down new terrain. You are, quite literally, becoming someone slightly different than you were yesterday. The people who seem to move through life with a kind of settled lightness are not lucky. They are not simply born that way. Somewhere, knowingly or not, they practiced their way there. One return to the present moment, one redirected thought, one small refusal to follow the old current, at a time. The mind you have right now is not a verdict. It is a record of what you've repeated, which means the mind you'll have a year from now is still, right now, entirely unwritten. Here's the second one expanded. Somewhere along the way, we started treating attention as if it were infinite, as if we could scatter it endlessly across 100 tabs, 1,000 notifications, and still have enough left over for the moment actually in front of us. But attention is not infinite. It is one of the most finite resources we have, and what we do with it moment by moment is quietly deciding who we become. Here's what most people miss about attention. It isn't just a spotlight that reveals what already exists. It's close to a hand that shapes what it touches. Whatever you give sustained attention to doesn't just get noticed. It gets strengthened, deepened, made more real in your inner world. Give your attention to what's missing in your life, and lack becomes the architecture of your days. Give it to what's threatening, and threat becomes the lens through which everything else gets filtered. This isn't a metaphor. It's closer to how the mind actually works. You don't just perceive your reality, you participate in constructing it, one act of attention at a time. Think of the last conversation, where you were fully there. No phone in your peripheral vision, no mental rehearsal of what you'd say next, just listening the way you'd listen. If you knew it might be the last conversation you ever had with that person, something shifts in moments like that. Not because the circumstances changed, but because you finally showed up for the circumstances that were already there, waiting. This is the quiet tragedy of a distracted life. It's not that nothing good happens in it. Good things happen constantly. The tragedy is that half of them go unfelt, because the mind that could have received them was somewhere else. Replaying an old argument, rehearsing a future that hasn't arrived, scrolling toward nothing in particular. You can live an entire life this way and, at the end of it, feel as though you were never quite present for your own story. To pay attention on purpose is one of the most radical acts available to a human being, precisely because it goes against the grain of a world built to fracture it. Every app, every headline, every algorithm is engineered to pull your attention somewhere else, somewhere profitable, somewhere loud. Choosing where your attention goes, again and again, deliberately, is not a small discipline. It is closer to an act of authorship. It says, "This is my life, and I intend to actually be in it. Not someday, not once I've earned the right to rest, but now in this room, in this breath, in this exact unremarkable moment that will never come again in quite this way." Here's the third one expanded. There is a particular kind of lie that fear tells, and it is so convincing that most of us never think to question it. The lie is this, that the trembling in your chest, the tightness in your throat, the sudden urge to retreat, these are signals telling you to stop. That fear is information about danger, and the wise thing to do is listen and pull back. Sometimes that's true, but far more often, especially in the modern life most of us live, fear is not warning you about a threat to your survival. It is warning you about a threat to your comfort. And those are not the same thing, even though they feel identical in the body. Think about the moments in your life that actually changed you. Really changed you, not just rearranged your schedule. The conversation you didn't want to have. The room you walked into where you knew no one. The truth you finally said out loud after years of silence. I would guess that almost none of those moments felt safe while you were living them. They felt like standing at the edge of something, with no guarantee of what waited on the other side. And you walked forward, anyway. This is the thing about fear that almost no one tells you plainly. It does not go away once you become brave. Bravery was never the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep walking while fear is still talking. Every person you have ever admired for their courage still felt the tremble. They simply stopped treating the tremble as a locked door and started treating it as a threshold. A place you pass through, not a wall you're meant to stay behind forever. And here is where it becomes almost mathematical, almost neurological in its precision. Every single time you walk through discomfort instead of shrinking from it, you are teaching your own nervous system a new lesson. You are proving, in real time, in your own body, that you survived something you were certain would break you. That evidence accumulates, it compounds. And slowly, the mind that once treated every uncertain moment as an emergency starts to recognize a different truth. I have done hard things before, and I am still here. This is not about eliminating fear from your life. That would be neither possible nor wise. Fear has its uses, its warnings worth heeding. This is about no longer confusing the presence of fear with the absence of choice. The trembling can be there, the doubt can be there, and you can still take the step. Somewhere on the other side of that step is not just an outcome. It's a slightly different version of you, 1 degree less afraid than the person who woke up that morning, 1 degree more willing to meet whatever comes next, standing upright instead of shrinking away. Here's the 4th one expanded. There is a voice that runs underneath almost everything you do. So constant that most people stop noticing it's even there. The way you stop noticing the hum of a refrigerator until someone points it out. It comments on your mistakes before anyone else has the chance to. It rehearses your failures long after the moment has passed. It tells you, in 1,000 small ways, exactly how far short of enough you have fallen. And here is what makes this voice so dangerous. Because it lives inside your own head, using your own words, in something that sounds like your own reasoning. You rarely stop to ask whether it's actually telling you the truth. We have built an entire culture around the belief that this harsh inner voice is what drives achievement, that if we were kinder to ourselves, we would grow soft, complacent, undisciplined. So we mistake cruelty for motivation and call it high standards. But what actually happens to his mind under constant self-attack? It doesn't rise to the challenge, it contracts. It becomes cautious, defensive, more afraid of failing than excited about succeeding. A person who is terrified of their own inner critic does not take risks. They hide from anything that might give that critic more ammunition. Now imagine, for a moment, a child in your life who is struggling, stumbling through something difficult, making the kind of mistakes that come from trying. Picture how you would speak to them. You would not list their inadequacies. You would not tell them they should have known better. You would kneel down to their level and say something like, "This is hard and it makes sense that you're struggling. And I'm still here." That instinct is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's the understanding, somewhere deep in you, that people grow through steadiness, not through punishment. So here is the question worth sitting with. Why does that same steadiness disappear the moment the struggling person is you? Self-compassion is not indulgence, and it is not an excuse to stop trying. It is maintenance. The ongoing work of keeping the structure of your self-worth intact, so it can actually bear weight when life presses down on it, as life inevitably will. A mind built on constant self-criticism is a mind with no reserves. Nothing to draw on when things genuinely fall apart. A mind practiced in compassion toward itself has something sturdier underneath it. Not the absence of high standards, but the presence of a foundation that doesn't crack every time those standards go unmet. The voice you use most often with yourself is not neutral. It is architecture. It is the material you are building your entire inner life out of, beam by beam, sentence by sentence, and whatever you construct that way, you will eventually have to live inside.